Do you hear me? I'm talking to you. Across the water, across the deep blue ocean, under the open sky. Oh my, baby, I'm trying.
Boy, I hear you in my dreams. I feel you whisper across the sea. I keep you with me in my heart. You make it easier when life gets hard.
Lucky I'm in love with my best friend. Lucky to have been where I have been. Lucky to be coming home again.
They don't know how long it takes
waiting for a love like this.
every time
We say goodbye. I wish we had one more kiss. I'll wait for you. I promise you I will. Lucky I'm in love with my best friend. Lucky to have been where I have been. Lucky to be coming home again. Lucky we're in love in every way. Lucky to have stayed where we have stayed. Lucky to be coming home someday. And so I'm sailing through the sea to an island where we'll meet. You'll hear the music, feel the air. I'll put a flower in your hair.
golden breezes through the trees move so pretty. You're all I see as the world keeps spinning round. You hold me right here, right now.
Lucky I'm in love with my best friend. Lucky to have been where I have been. Lucky to be coming home again. Lucky we're in love in every way. Lucky to have stayed where we have stayed. Lucky to be coming home someday. When your legs don't work like they used to before, and I can't sweep you off of your feet, will your mouth still remember the taste of my love? Will your eyes still smile from your cheeks? Darling, I will be loving you till we're 70. And baby, my heart could still fall as hard at 23. And I'm thinking about how people fall in love in mysterious ways. Maybe just the touch of a hand. Well, me, I fall in love with you every single day. And I just wanna tell you I am. So honey.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I can take absolutely no credit for the music choices, I must just confirm. Welcome to the very latest CX Doers webinar, coming to us in collaboration with Semantica. It is such a wonderful honor to be able to host this critically important webinar, something that I've wanted to host for a long time, actually, and finally, we've been able to bring this to you. Welcome to all of you joining us from literally all around the world. As you can see, even without instruction, everyone is telling you where they're coming from in the chat. And I encourage you to continue to use the chat to communicate with me, with my fantastic colleagues who I'm going to introduce in a moment, and to ask questions. I absolutely encourage you to ask questions during the session. We will come to your questions during a debate that we're going to have in a little while, and at the end of the webinar when we do a formal Q&A. So please do post your questions as we go along, and we will do our very best to get to as many of those questions as we can. The reason that this webinar is so important is because for me, the focus for organizations right now, as well, obviously, as customer experience, is employee experience. As I've said for many years, the most customer-centric organizations on earth have always understood that you cannot deliver great customer experiences until or unless you're able to deliver great employee experiences. And post the pandemic, as we are in the midst of a global economic crisis, which seems to be getting worse, not better, our ability as organizations to increase the focus on the employee is more important than ever before. But saying that is very easy. Doing it is a different matter altogether. And as we know, customer experience is now a recognized profession. It's a recognized discipline with competencies, with professional qualifications. It's talked about all around the world. That doesn't necessarily mean it's being done well, but at least it is established as a discipline. When it comes to the employee experience, we are much earlier in its evolution. There is no recognized profession for employee experience. There is no recognized professional body. It is a subject that is so important, but much less defined. And so whilst it's becoming increasingly important for organizations to focus on it, there is a real need for organizations to learn exactly what that means. And that's where this webinar comes in. Because we are incredibly fortunate today to be joined by two incredible professionals who are both professionals in customer experience, but even more importantly, have a significant specialism in the field of employee experience. And I am as excited to learn about them as I am to host the session itself. We are going to be joined today by two brilliant professionals. One of them is a lady who I've known for many years and who I've had the pleasure of working with, and that is the incredible Christina Dolding. Dolding and Golding, it's just a coincidence that our names are so similar. And Christina has won many awards over the years, including Customer Experience Professional of the Year, for the work that she's done to improve the customer experience, but very much delivered through the employee. But as you will hear from Christina, she has developed a very specific methodology to ensure that you don't just talk about employee experience, you operationalize it. And so we're very lucky to be joined by her. But we're also going to be joined by the incredible Sandra Thompson. I have known Sandra for many years as well. And Sandra has been working for probably as long, if not longer, than anyone else, not just in the UK, but globally, on developing employee experience as a discipline. And so we're incredibly fortunate to be joined by her, and she will share her considerable expertise to help us understand how to make the focus on employee far more tangible. So we have potentially two of the most influential brains who are focusing on employee experience around the world. The fact that they happen to be based in the UK is just coincidental. So Whilst I'm sure you like hearing my voice, this webinar is not about me, it is about Christina and Sandra. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce Christina as our first keynote speaker, essentially, for the webinar. Now, just a couple of other things I'm going to say about Christina to embarrass her before I pass over to her. Christina is one of the most sincere, genuine, and honest customer experience professionals I've had the pleasure of meeting in my career. She will literally do whatever it takes to do the right thing for the customer and for the colleague. And I use the word colleague intentionally because Christina very much believes in the need for us to not think about people as employees, but to think about them as colleagues. And so without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you the brilliant Christina Dolding. Christina, over to you.
Oh, thanks so much for such a wonderful introduction, Ian, and everyone welcome. I'm thrilled and delighted and honoured that so many people have joined from around the globe. I just want to check, Ian, can you hear me? Okay, cool.
We can hear you perfectly. I'm going to turn my camera off, Christina, so you don't get confused by my horrible face. So
not at all. But thank you again. A real privilege and honour to do this today. But as Ian said, just to set up the context for my part in this webinar, I want to be upfront about this. I have got something against the word employee, right? I know it's technically correct, but for me, it creates a line. It creates hierarchy. That master-servant vibe, slightly parent and child. And when we talk organisationally about employees, I believe it sets us off in the wrong direction, and communications and interactions become much more tell rather than collegiate. So I do prefer the word colleague, and I'm going to be using that today. So as Ian said, colleague experience is in its infancy, and I get asked a lot about what colleague experience actually is. Thinking back to the world of customer experience, when people used to think it was solely experience, there are a huge number of misconceptions out there. Someone said to me last week, it's about chocolates and gifts, so you're doing employee engagement. Lots of people are doing that. And I attended a webinar last year where the company felt the colleague experience was essentially only something which needed attention in their contact centre, which was an interesting concept. Someone else said I would have my work cut out getting companies to care about what their colleagues thought of them. So we definitely have a challenge ahead of us, but one well worth taking on. So earlier this year, Ian and I worked on a definition of colleague experience, which has wonderfully just appeared on the screen, and here it is. So in the same way that customer experience is from the very beginning of a transaction or interaction, so it is for colleagues. Ian and I do have an extended, more detailed version of this, which covers the impact of environment and life events, but for today, we're keeping it simple. And just as a reminder, it's everything from the point of looking to join an organisation to the leaving and everything in between. But on the point of leaving, this isn't the day that you leave. You leave work. It's when you get your final payment for your salary, when your references are done, when you get your bonus and you get your belongings back. So it essentially is the same thinking as in the world of customer experience. But I want to look at the organisational pillars of colleague experience. And there we go. So there are, oh, it's got carried away. Sorry.
It's okay. We can see them, Christina. It's cool.
You've got it. Okay, that's fine. So if you look at the organisational pillars of colleague experience, engagement and culture, as you can see there, are probably relatively well known. Less so are management and measurement. And as you know, you can manage and measure customer experience. Well, did you know you can do the same with colleague experience? You can use the same tools and techniques. And for my money, I actually think it's slightly easier. So we've got culture, management, measurement, and engagement. Looking at culture with a corporate lens, there are so many definitions out there. In short, company culture is defined as a shared set of values, goals, attitude, and practices which make up an organisation. Many of you will have those written down for your company, but do they truly exist in the DNA of your organisation? Well, if they do, that's brilliant. But in my experience, it's quite unusual. And I truly believe it's equally important to consider how the organisation will behave towards its own colleagues, not just as an external brand or client experience. So let me show you a simple example. Let's see if this works. Esther, can you tab this forward for me? There we go. Thank you. No, that one. Thank you. So let me show you a simple example of how this partnership approach with customer and colleague values can work. So in front of you are a set of promises, and then put that in inverted commas, which were used extensively for customers in a financial services organisation. And a lot of work went into bringing these to life for customers. So what it meant was, we will make it easy for you in all aspects of your experience with us. We will make you feel like a valued client. We will ensure you have peace of mind at all touch points in your journey with us. So let me take my customer hat and put my colleague hat on and turn it on its head for you. As a colleague, we want to make it easy for you to work here. We want to make you feel like a valued colleague. And we want to make sure you have peace of mind at all the touch points you have on your journey with us. These things do not go hand in hand unless you intentionally do something about it. Aligning customer and colleagues' values, goals, and experiences is incredibly powerful. You might think it sounds difficult, but it isn't. Yes, it takes time, but it can be done, and in doing so, creates and fosters an incredible working environment. So I'm going to see if my slide works this time. No, there we go. So back to the 4 pillars. Culture is, of course, the big one. And best practice would suggest that some of the things you'd see in a high-performing organisation would be clear ownership and accountability of the colleague experience across the business. Decisions and investments are made with good colleague experiences in mind. All levels of the organisation have colleague experience KPIs built into performance metrics. And by this, I don't mean KPIs related to colleague opinion surveys. The pillars of management and measurement support the need for intentional colleague experiences. I'm sure some of you have heard that well-known operational phrase, inspect what you expect. Well, it really does matter that you have clear line of sight of the colleague experience. It is just as important as managing and measuring your client or customer experience, if not even more so. To touch briefly on engagement, as we said earlier, this isn't about hampers and gifts at certain strategic points in the year. It's about getting the basics right. So pay and benefits sit in here. And I should say at this point, having the best pay or benefits package in your sector isn't always going to be possible. And the organisation, you really have to take a position on it. For example, you might be mid-table in terms of salary. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that, but organisations need to be honest about this with colleagues. And colleagues don't mind so much if they understand the why. Well, they don't mind quite so much, but honesty helps hugely. But what is important is to focus on the things which you do. Recognition, charity, volunteering work, support for things like mental health and the menopause, and make sure you have career paths and social events on your agenda too. And do not underestimate the power of celebrating a work birthday, a promotion, or passing probation. These things matter to colleagues. So pay and benefits are just part of a much, much bigger experience. And if you do not focus on these areas, you will risk losing key colleagues, you will have difficulty attracting new colleagues, the experience you're providing to your clients will not be top-notch, and in reality, it will be costing you money you don't need to be spending. In my own experience, getting your colleague experience right and consistently right can ultimately save you, and I say conservatively, 10% in operational costs. It's that impactful. So I just want to move on to the next slide if it's working. Yes, here we go. So I love this. So if any of you worked with Ian before, you'll have seen a level 0 customer journey. What fascinates me about the colleague journey at its highest level here It is the same regardless of sector or industry. And that's where it differs from customer experience. So I have a financial services background, but I have recently used this model to map the crew journey on a super yacht, and it worked brilliantly. So the tools and techniques in the world of colleague experience are industry and sector agnostic. You can literally take any process or experience in the colleague journey, and you can map it in any level of detail you like. And with colleagues, you have all the people who need to do this within your organisation. Oh, I've just realised I've not got my video on, apologies. Colleague journey mapping is a great way to get insight and do solution-focused problem solving. Organisations have tended to focus solely on things like recruitment and onboarding because that's where the immediate pain is. But whilst it's very important, you are only then focusing on, say, the first 3 to 6 months. But what happens after that? Well, what happens after that needs to be agreed, it needs to be designed, it needs to be implemented, embedded, managed and measured, and you need to report on it too. And a quick focus on life events, an often overlooked area of the colleague experience. This is where something in the colleague's life bumps into their work life in either a positive or negative way. So, for example, marriage, buying a house, adoption or birth of a child. All bump into your work in some way, even if it's simply a matter of being able to take the time off that you need. But the management of life events is absolutely crucial. We can all think about what would constitute a life event for us, but these vary very much by individual and sometimes by industry as well. You will probably never create an exhaustive list, but you can get close. For example, divorce for one colleague might not actually impact their work, but for another, it is going to be catastrophic and it will hugely impact their work. And for example, in the world of super yachts, a failed medical can bring an abrupt end to your offshore career. Thinking about how you respond individually and organisationally is therefore hugely important. One manager being supportive and kind could create a difficult situation where another manager is being very task and rule-based in their approach. Such polarised responses to the same life event can cause you significant issues in your organisation. You can even end up in an employment tribunal if they cannot be resolved in-house. But the good news is life events can easily be journey maps. You can make the changes you want to see, you can implement them, embed them, manage them, measure them, and again, report on them. It is so important to have the oversight of reporting. What I would say at this point is you can easily lose a colleague to a badly managed life event. But at the same time, colleagues are also in the main incredibly forgiving because unlike customers, it's not that easy for them to walk away. So an elegant recovery in these situations can make all the difference. And you can come out the other side with an even happier and more engaged colleague because you listened and took appropriate action. And just a little cheeky tip at this point, always worth a look at your maternity-paternity journey. You will probably find inconsistencies and huge opportunities to improve. How often do companies survey colleagues who've come back from maternity or paternity leave and ask how the experience was? I have done this one quite a few times, and I promise it's worth doing. And before I leave this slide, I do think you can create an easy or as easy as possible leaving experience, regardless of the reasons for leaving. And clearly, some are going to be more challenging than others. But if you have the intent to make this an easy journey, then you will most definitely improve the experience. And this is of interest because we're starting to see what are called boomerang colleagues. Colleagues who return to you at either a new point in their career or because they realise that the grass is not greener on the other side of the employment fence. Experts say boomerang employees could be the next big trend after the Great Resignation, as workers who left their job during the pandemic regret their decision. So having a happy leaving experience is super important. And measuring and managing and understanding boomerang colleagues is an incredibly satisfying metric. Go on to the next slide. Here we go. So I'd like to move on to the evolution of the colleague experience. We've touched on some of this already, but here's a diagram showing how an organisation can evolve and the benefits it brings. If things are not written down, trained in, managed and measured, then you will be delivering a random colleague experience. Some of those might actually be good, and this is where your good team leaders and managers and teams will shine. But you will have huge discrepancies in your experience across the board. And leaving things like this to chance will lead to attrition, difficulty in attracting new colleagues, and it is a very, very expensive way to run a business. Whilst clients won't necessarily be receiving a bad experience, they won't be receiving the best experience. Colleagues, even unhappy ones, will generally do their job well, but those areas where discretionary effort makes all the difference will be lacking, and therefore there'll be a lack of engagement for anything new as well. And as mentioned before, it does always leave you at the risk of an employment tribunal. But creating an intentional experience is a step forward. But just to reiterate, intentional doesn't necessarily mean good. So it's worth sense checking what you're doing delivers what you expect. So what is important is leadership training, and how many of your leaders are trained in the experience which the organisation wants you to deliver, right down to the granular detail of things like absence management, coaching, one-to-ones, team meetings, performance management, reward and recognition. And believe it or not, culturally, you need to train in recognition, and the benefits of doing it well. It might seem simple, but it doesn't always come naturally to people. And I have lost count of the number of times in my own operational career where I've been asked how to write a thank you to a colleague. Differentiated experiences come when your colleague population is actually engaged in this work. So I'm not advocating that all experiences are differentiated, because clearly that wouldn't be commercially viable or desirable. But your colleagues will tell you if asked where you need to focus your attention. By evidencing that you're listening and responding, they will feel heard. And a virtuous circle begins with lower attrition, absence, and colleagues will start to encourage their own friends and family to join the organisation if suitable roles come up. Happy, more experienced colleagues will drive greater client experiences. So all in all, a win-win. And finally, and particularly thinking about the current challenge around the attraction and retention of colleagues, you need to think about personalisation. So this is something which we think about in the world of customer experience, and it's happening more frequently. This has to be an area of huge focus for colleagues. It really does matter, particularly for the next generation and future generation of colleagues. Those colleagues are looking for something a little bit different. And this one isn't very difficult because, again, your colleagues are there. You can ask them what they think they need, and you can make the changes you want to. But one big example just now is something called job crafting. And if you haven't heard of it, it's essentially shaping a colleague's role to suit their strengths and skills, whilst at the same time keeping all the aspects of the role you need organisationally. And that is starting to get some traction. So just in closing, I wanted to make the point this is all about, she said, coming on to the final slide. It's not there. There we go. The lovely Maya Angelou. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. It's about how we make colleagues feel. Get that right and great things will surely happen. So thank you so much for listening.
Christina, that was fabulous. I said I'm looking forward to learning from you and Sandra as much as hosting. And I always think when I'm learning, are there tweetable things that you say? Obviously, other platforms are available, but I always think of it as a potential for tweeting. And there are certain things you said that absolutely bang on. Boomerang colleagues was a really interesting expression that I've never heard before until today. But just to confirm, Christina, that you are absolutely right. I was with a bank last week, and in the workshop that I was facilitating, there were 15 people. 4 of the people in that room had left the organisation previously and come back to it. So it just goes to prove that absolutely is something that is happening. I'm also fascinated about your statement of the focus on improving employee experience could contribute to as much as 10% in operational costs, which are, I mean, ultimately that is what organizations are looking for. So we will probably explore that in a bit more detail. And what I love most about everything you say, the philosophy that you're advocating, is how similar it is to what we're trying to do with customer experience. You know, it's not that this is some weird, wacky cult type thing. You know, the principles are the same. But from my experience, organizations that are thinking about employee experience tend to focus on the onboarding journey, which is an expression I hate. You know, it's all about recruitment. It's not about the end-to-end experience of an employee. And so I think you have given everyone a lot of food for thought already. I need to have a conversation with you as to how you get a super yacht client, but that we'll take that offline. I don't get super yachts, unfortunately, but anyway, that's a different conversation. Christina, thank you so much for starting off the webinar so brilliantly. Before we get Sandra's official perspective on all of this, we're going to move into a debate, because I think it's a perfect opportunity to officially welcome Sandra and introduce Sandra to everyone. And between myself, Christina, and Sandra, we're going to address 4 questions. And so, ladies, I'm going to essentially grill you with 4 questions, if that's okay. But I think it will further advance what Christina has shared already, and hopefully be a brilliant segue into what Sandra is going to share with us afterwards. And ladies, there are lots of questions and comments being thrown into the chat, which I will throw at you when we get to the Q&A a little bit later. So Sandra, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you because no one has heard from you yet. And the question I want to ask is, as a customer experience professional, one of the greatest challenges we face is, how do you convince a leadership team to invest in it? You know, how much is it going to cost to become customer centric? With employee experience, or colleague experience, as Christina prefers to call it, why should an organization invest in it? How can we convince leaders that, do you know what, now is the time to focus as much on this as they might be on the customer?
So really building on what Christina said already, it does come back to the hard cash first thing, because we know that that's a boardroom conversation. So some outstanding HR people who I have had the pleasure of learning from have talked about the cost of attrition, the cost of the knowledge drain, and the fact that you can't get stuff done as easily because those people with the knowledge, for whatever reason, haven't necessarily passed that on enough, or they just have a load of knowledge they forget that they've got. So a boomerang would be great to bring them back in. Ultimately, it costs thousands to get people in. It costs thousands to get them trained up, depending on the role that they have. And don't forget, and we all know this, the actual benefit, the profits we can bring from people having great relationships with one another, because we come up with better ideas, we solve problems faster, plus the relationships that good employees have with customers brings greater profitability. You can put numbers on that. I mean, Christina's already talked about the 10%,
yes.
21% higher profitability when there is greater employee engagement. There are fewer incidents, so less dangerous things happening. People aren't getting hurt as much. That was definitely something that happened at the Network Rail when I worked with them. And lower absenteeism, when people don't show up, sick days, all that kind of stuff. So there are hard numbers that you can distill on a dashboard to show how much it's costing you.
Fantastic. You're giving us more tweetable stuff there, Sandra, which is absolutely brilliant. And you know, to a degree, it sounds so obvious, like all of this stuff does. But that brain drain that you talk about, I think, post the pandemic, as we come out of it all around the world, we've seen that, because, you know, some people have decided that they've had enough and they don't want to come back. Is that what you see?
100%. I see people not only just fed up with the lack of recognition, the fact that just a simple thank you when people were trying to manage their homes, their kids, illness, death, all that horrible stuff that came with that time. No recognition, no acknowledgement. And people just thought, you know what? That's the final straw. I'm going to go somewhere where I know people like me and they want me to be there and they make it possible for me to do a great job.
Just out of interest, Sandra and Christina, I'm going to come to you in a moment. I don't know if there are statistics that are available related to some of these things, but for example, is it possible to determine how long it takes typically to train a new employee to be at the same level as an experienced employee? And I'm saying this really for those that are listening, where could they go to get facts and information like that?
That is a very good question. And I think it will depend on the sector. It depends on the sector. It depends on the degree of specialization. So I probably wouldn't direct people to one place. Christina, have you got somewhere in mind that you could go for global statistics?
I saw a very good report by Snack Nation, and I think it's 11 shopping statistics, and it talks about that. I was actually just trying to get it up to hand. It is definitely worth a look at the end of this. I think it's called 11 shopping statistics, and it talks about productivity, it talks about attrition, and actually it talks the importance of having friends at work. Like if you've got a really good friend at work, you're more likely to stay. So it links back to that social engagement, that activity. And I just wanted to add on as well that, you know, if you have got high attrition, you've then got on costs of overtime. My last background was an operation role, triple time. People don't want to do overtime anymore. So you're paying 3 times the going rate to get people to try and do overtime. And your SLAs go backwards, which causes an impact on your client experience.
Christina, if possible, people are asking if you can find that report, if you could share a link to it in the chat.
You're asking me technical questions. I will try when Sandra's
Mandy and
talking,
Benoit, we there we go.
There it is.
Anna has jumped in. Look at that. See, this is the spirit of collaboration and cooperation. Thank you, Anna. Christina, with all of that in mind, from your experience of doing things like this, what challenges can people face? So if there is no sort of intentional focus on employee experience, what barriers are in the way?
Competing budgets and business priorities, that's the big one. A lack of understanding at exco level can sometimes be an issue. I think sometimes you get people that do get it and people that don't, and sales and new business, I think the current market will take priority and investment there. I also think there's sometimes a cultural gap between the top of an organisation and the grassroots level that needs to be addressed. And I think sales is another thing. I think organisations forget sales are your brand ambassadors. And I've done some quite interesting employee net promoter work with sales, and they are actually sometimes the least engaged and least supportive of the brand, which is ironic, really, when you think about it. And I think sales almost get forgotten about in this world. So I think we focus in the wrong places sometimes.
But is that, as we know, in the world of customer experience, we've become so task focused. I mean, we've always been task focused, whether it be the public or the private sector. But again, post the pandemic, that seems to have become even worse. Sandra, again, hearing what Christina's saying, I'm sure you agree. What can we do to address it? How can we overcome that? I mean, is it just we have to be exceptionally irritating, which, as you know, I am, and that's how I get people to listen? Or do we need to again keep coming back to the facts and shocking people with some of these numbers that get them to wake up and smell the coffee?
Unless people feel something, they're just not going to get it. So if I asked everyone that was on this call just for a second to think about a boss that they didn't get on very well with, or a colleague, when that email comes in, you're like, oh my God, it's just the worst thing. You know, we all react to other humans. So the human experience is because we're filled with a bunch of chemicals and we respond in very different ways when we anticipate a particular experience. So I think that inviting people at board level to just sit there for a minute and think about the last time they had an interaction with a member of staff and how much they would do for someone that they respected and liked, how much they would do for someone who challenged them in a healthy way. I'm not about being nice, but I am about being effective. And those that were grumpy, nasty, vindictive, blah, blah, it's all about how we feel. And I think until we get that consciousness, which is engaging our unconscious mind, then no one's going to pay any attention.
Completely agree.
Because, you know, the whole thing here is that we join organizations and most often we leave our managers. That's the most common thing that goes on.
Do you know what? Again, I'm writing it down because that's very tweetable, Sandra.
Thank you, Ian.
Join organizations and leave managers. It's so true.
I've done it 4 times. I know I've done it 4 times in my career.
And it comes back to Christina's explanation of the random experience, you know, which we can have as customers, but we can have as employees in exactly the same way. So one more question for you, Christina, and then Sandra, I'm really keen to get to you to share your insights into all of this. Who should own this, Christina? This is a serious debate, and I'm sure we could spend an hour talking about this alone. From what I'm seeing globally, HR think it's theirs. This is all about people, so this is ours. What's your view? Who should be driving the employee experience or colleague experience in an organization?
It's a very good question, and Sandra and I have had this discussion as well. I think it's more than HR. I think you know, though, when you do those multiple choice questions, when you're doing computer-based training, is it A, HR, B, and C, and then D, all of us? I think it's D, all of us. But I think HR have to set up the framework in conjunction generally with the EXCO to allow this to happen. And I saw somebody said in the chat, customer experience and employee experience go hand in hand. Now, what HR departments don't know what the customer experience is. So we've got a way to go to bring that, you know, align that organisationally, but I think we can. I think it's very easy. Yes. So I think the answer to your question is everybody, but a framework needs to be provided organisationally to facilitate that.
Fabulous. Christina, Sandra, thank you. I'm going to pause our debate for now because otherwise we'll run out of time. If anyone has ever heard me doing anything, we could speak for months and years. So it is better that we pause for the moment. We will come back for a Q&A. But before we do, it is now time for Sandra to share her perspective, developing that thought on the power of emotion. So Sandra is incredibly passionate about emotion and how we make people feel. And she's going to share a little bit of the science behind it, I believe. So Sandra, just before I ask you to speak, as well as knowing Sandra for a long time and her being, I think, one of the global advocates of this approach to employee experience, we were both born in exactly the same place. So we have a very human connection, Sandra, but over to you.
Oh dear, how to follow that? Right. So I'm going to talk about a couple of things here. I'm going to talk firstly about the human aspect. I want to talk about what it means to just be human, because the fact is that we forget sometimes that we're just dealing with other people like us. So I want to show you, let me see how we're getting on with that. Right, I want to show you this. Some of you that are on this call may recognize this. It's from the chimp paradox, and you can't actually see that brain, but I'm holding a plastic brain as well. This is a cartoon of our brain. And the amazing thing about this cartoon is that it helps us understand how people show up. So just bear with me for a minute while I mention a couple of characters from this amazing book called The Chimp Paradox. There's a chimp in here, and that chimp represents the emotional center. This is the bit where it's very, very old bit of our brain, and the chimp is totally fine if it's feeling calm, collected, everything's running how it should be. It doesn't like uncertainty, and it certainly doesn't like gaps in communication because it starts to panic, and it certainly doesn't like nasty surprises. The front part of the brain is much, much newer, and it's what we call our executive center. It's our prefrontal cortex. It's where we think logically, we can make decisions, and it's all great. Now, when the chimp kicks off, because it's feeling threatened, it's feeling fearful, it's scared, that whole fight, flight, freeze thing, it shuts off the front bit, which means we can't think clearly. Not good when we're in work and we need to make decisions. And let's just think about stuff for a minute. We've just been through a time of absolute uncertainty on steroids. We're now also in a period of time, because of the war and the economic uncertainty, where we don't know what's going on. If we think about managing people, and if we think about how we run our organizations, if we just kept people informed, if we just reassured them, and again, to take some words from Christina, to give people peace of mind so they know what their role is, that they know if they're doing okay, if they know where they need to make some improvements, the chimp can be calm and the prefrontal cortex is working well. Some words. I'd like to give you some feedback. Famous saying, used to have my bosses say that to me, which I would then anticipate as, oh my God, I'm going to get told off. Chimp would go mad, couldn't hear a word they were saying because I was in absolute panic mode. And sometimes, not always, the feedback was really great, but all I was listening for were the negative things. So just think about some of the things that we do to one another in the workplace that are unnecessary. And we don't need to get our chimp to go berserk. We can keep people informed. We don't keep a big vacuum. We understand how people want to communicate with each other. We understand a whole bunch of stuff around how we like to work, where we like to work. And it's even more critical as we work in a hybrid and in a remote setting. Communication is key because we know we can keep that chimp calm. So that's just a little bit about the human brain and treating one another in a way that means we don't lose it. We don't go berserk in our brain, start to fear, start to panic. We just don't need to do that. Okay, I'd like to move on. Let's see how we're getting on. This is the slide I'd like to show you now, which is about emotional intelligence. Now, why I am a big fan of emotional intelligence is because when you practice this skill, you have the ability to calm the chimp down. In actual fact, the chimp might not even go berserk because you have managed to work out how you're feeling. You have that emotional self-awareness, and then you're able to show up a way that's very helpful. Now, again, you might have worked with people who have slammed doors, started to shout, lost it, which is very disconcerting, and it can cause high degrees of anxiety. You also have people who seem to contain themselves, who seem to be able to be present and consistent, but they are able to describe how they feel. They are able to articulate what it is that's going on with them. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the Goleman model. You start with emotional self-awareness, you then move into management, and then you see empathy. My biggest challenge for all of you is that empathy can only be done well when you practice the skill of emotional intelligence, because I can only tell you from personal experience, when I used to be employed and a colleague would come up to me and say, oh, I know exactly how you feel. Yeah, exactly. My friend went through exactly the same. And I just felt like, oh my gosh, you have absolutely no idea because you're not me. And the amazing thing is that when you practice emotional self-awareness, when you practice the skill of emotional intelligence, you recognize how you're feeling, and then you're able to ask brilliant questions of the other person, and then they really, really feel like they're heard. And once you get to that point, you are utterly brilliant at influencing. You coach and you mentor. You're great at teamwork. There probably isn't a great deal of conflict going on, and you are an inspirational leader. That's what we're talking about here. So what I'd like to do now is move to this bad boy. So I have a question for you. You don't have to answer it necessarily, but how well do you know the needs of the people in your organization? And I'm not talking about I really need to work from home. I'm not talking about I really need the corner office. I'm talking about things like I need to be recognized socially. I want to be part of a network. I want to be able to contribute and to have some banter. I need that. What about people who want to be planners, who absolutely have to know what's going on when, and they need to know where they need to show up and how you want to do it? Now, there's an amazing guy called Dr. Simon Moore who he set up a business called We Are IB, and he's got these archetypes, 4 archetypes. And if we knew what those 4 archetypes were, we would be able to give people not only the deep-rooted, the subconscious needs met, we would then be able to tailor exactly what the value proposition is in recognition of that. Imagine that. Imagine working in a place where you have the type of relationship with your boss and your colleagues that represent your subconscious needs, plus some of the kind of above the line types of benefits that are personalized for you. I might not want time off. I might want to actually go on a course that's going to teach me a skill that I might not want to use in work. I might want to take a secondment at some point. I don't need paternity. When are we going to start tailoring this stuff like we personalize customer experiences? Oh, Ian, I'm getting very excited. So the point here is that when we have a recognition of emotion and when we understand how we are showing up, we are more likely to avoid this thing, which is called negative emotional contagion. Because I don't know about you, but I've walked into a room before where you can cut the atmosphere with a knife, or you can tell that someone's got a right mood on, or you can tell that someone's angry, and it's contagious. You suddenly think, well, what's going on? Why is that? When they practice the skill of emotional intelligence, they are able to manage their chimp. The prefrontal cortex is working well, better decisions are made, and then we can start to think as well about that's the human. Here are the personality types. Here are the communication types. Let's start working out what people really want from their work. And there endeth the sermon.
Sandra, brilliant as always. Thank you so much. There is a very important question someone has put, actually, which I'm going to pose to you in our Q&A. Christina, if you want to turn your camera back on, because I want to ask 2 questions to both of you, and then we'll close the webinar for now. For those who have additional questions that we don't answer, we will respond to those afterwards. So we will ask Sandra and Christina to respond to them offline and send that to you. But the first question that I would love to pose to both of you comes back to earlier in the conversation, actually, but I think it is a question that I have a perspective on, and I know that both of you will do as well. The question was, are we shifting from customer first as a sort of strategic principle to colleague first as a strategic principle? Now, I'm not going to answer because you two are the specialists here. Christina, your view.
Oh, this is an interesting one. I think I'm going to say colleague by a smidge, but I think they go hand in hand. If I'm honest, I think it's dangerous to say one takes precedence over another. I think they kind of sort of belong in the same box. But if I was going to start, like in operational roles that I've started, I would always start with a customer, with a colleague. I'd always go and speak to the colleagues first, and then I would go and look at the customer sentiment and feedback. So I think it is colleague first, but not at and I think I saw in the chat, not at the expense of the customer experience, because that has to follow.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you, Christina. Sandra?
So this isn't going to be popular, but actually I've heard you say it a long time ago, Ian. I don't think it's either,
You're
mate.
saying I'm not popular, Sandra?
I'm not saying that.
I'm mortally wounded. No, I'm kidding.
I'm saying that it's human. It has got to be human for all of the reasons I've just explained. We are walking chemistry labs. We've got oxytocin, we have got serotonin, we've got cortisol, we've got the lot. And the fact is, and we missed it quite a bit when obviously lockdown was happening, where we didn't have social interaction, but we are all so incredibly influenced by one another. That is a fact. And so whether you're my boss or whether you're my customer, how I show up with you is going to influence what's going on. It comes back to Marilyn, I can't remember her name now,
Maya Angelou.
Yeah. Don't underestimate that, because it can leave an indelible mark.
Yes. And unfortunately, too many managers, leaders are leaving an indelible mark, unfortunately. The expression, just for all of you, that Sandra is referring to, that I use continuously, is that customer experience is all about human to human interaction. It always has been, and it always will be, which is why we need to have an alignment of employee and customer experience. And I think it's really, really important right now, because of this obsession with digital adoption, that many organizations actually think they can just eliminate the employee. We'll just save money, we'll get rid of them and replace them with AI or chatbots or whatever it might be. And that to a degree may be the right thing to do, but only if an organization understands the customer experience and how to align it. So I completely agree. Michelle Batt, by the way, Sandra, loves the walking chemistry labs. So again, so much tweetable stuff coming out here. Just as an addition to what both of you have said, I think it might be interesting for people to hear me just share this with you. A lot of what I do is about operationalizing customer experience, as I call it. And one of the things I will often help organizations do is to develop their customer experience strategy. And in the approach that I take to developing a customer experience strategy, part of the template, which Christina has seen before, asks organizations to define in simple terms the ambition of the organization, and to define in simple terms the ambition of the customer. But it's only at the beginning of this year that I changed that template. And I've now added, you'll both be delighted to hear, a third box to describe the ambition of the employee. And I think it's important for me to state that I'm learning all the time. And I think it was missing, that the employee has been missing from that definition of a customer experience strategy. So, and I've started to deploy it, and it's being received really well. And it's fascinating to see employees be asked that, what is it that you want? Because they've never been asked it before. Brilliant. Ladies, one more question, because we are rapidly running out of time. And I think this is a really interesting question, actually, that I don't think I am qualified to answer. So I'll let either of you respond to this. And I'm going to read it out. It's been submitted anonymously, and you'll understand why when I read it out. A new employee entered into my client relationship, and she seems to have a low EQ and is reaping havoc in my relationship with them. I'm blind to what's happening on that end. I've spoken to the owner and the chief of staff to defend my team. Do you have any advice? Thoughts? I don't know, Sandra, if that's something for you to respond to first.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. So what we don't know is what's going on in that individual's life. So that's the really key thing. And we know as well that the person is not the behavior. So we are not our behavior. You can separate those out. So I think that there is a conversation to be had, and it's a conversation about describing particular actual scenarios where this person hasn't shown up in a way that is helpful. Because unless you have exact examples and you can describe the impact of that, that person may have very low self-awareness. So there's an opportunity to have a conversation. Have the conversation to say, now this is the impact, because they may not know what impact they are having. If they continue to behave in that particular way, then that's a different conversation. But when you're able to bring it to their attention, then they have a choice to start to pay attention and grow their self-awareness, or not.
Yeah, that's a brilliant response, Sandra. Christina, anything to add to that?
No, I was going to say exactly the same thing, to have a conversation, explain the impact that they're having. Generally, you'll find if you do that, people will respond favourably to that.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much, Sandra and Christina. We could carry on for hours. And in fact, I'm tempted to probably convince both of you to do another one of these, because it's gone so quickly and there's more, I think, that people can learn from both of you. However, we have run out of time. But for those of you who are interested, as part of the Semantica Academy, Sandra will next month be hosting an employee experience masterclass. So if you would like to know more from Sandra, I urge you to sign up for that. As you've seen, it is brilliant. I, without question, urge you to connect with both Christina and Sandra and continue the conversation with them via LinkedIn or by email or whatever else you prefer. This subject is, as we've all said, very early in its evolution. And it's people like Sandra and Christina that are leading the way. So if you need guidance, support, help, they are the people that can absolutely help you. We will communicate with all of you as to where the slides will be available, where you can get them from, and so on. And if you have any further questions, please just reach out to any of us, reach out to the Semantica team, reach out to Christina, Sandra, or myself. So thank you so much for joining us. I found it fascinating. And so I really hope that you have as well. Huge thank you to Esther and the Semantica team for facilitating all of this and enabling us to do it. But bang on time, as Sandra and Christina know I always like to do, we have come to an end. Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the remainder of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Christina.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.